Hi everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'm sharing how I add elf ears to dolls. I'll be modifying this Fairyland Minifee Breakaway Scar Head using white Milliput epoxy clay. Any 2-part epoxy clay will work, this is just what I have on hand. You might want some sculpting tools like these, which can be found in any craft store's clay section. But I do most of my sculpting with my hands and dental cleaning tools. The red rubber tip is great for smoothing and shaping, and the metal tools are perfect for carving. So I'll start by mixing equal parts of the clay and blending them until it's a consistent white color with no yellow streaks. I love elves and use them in almost all my fantasy stories, so this is one of my favorite modifications to do. Once it's blended, it's time to start. If you can't get the clay to stick, you can use coarse sandpaper to add texture to the doll's resin. Once I get a piece to stick, I begin shaping the ear with my tools. I try to start small as the clay is kind of heavy and can sometimes sag under its own weight. I've had that change the shape of things I've sculpted, and it was frustrating to fix. So now I usually work in small pieces and let each section cure before I add more clay. I scrape away the excess clay as I go. If this were one of my dolls, I would probably actually remove the outer edge of the human ear, like I did on my own Little Fee Chloe. It's usually easier to get it to stick that way. But this minifee belongs to someone else, so I want to make sure this modification is completely reversible, in case she decides to change this doll in the future. You know, I think it's actually pronounced Minifee because of the accent over the one E, but I've never heard anyone say that. I wonder if anyone would know what I was talking about if I said Minifee instead. I guess that pronunciation makes more sense from a company called Fairyland, but then Feeple is supposed to sound like people, so I don't know which is correct. Anyway. I use the rubber tip of this tool to blend the clay into the existing ear, getting a nice smooth edge that's difficult to achieve with other tools. Epoxy clay smooths out easily using plain water, so I dip the tool in water before rubbing the places I want to smooth out. The smoother you can get in the sculpting stage, the easier the finishing work will be, especially in narrow areas like the inner ear and the back of the ear where it meets the head. My personal preference is to use a lot of clay and then refine the shape through carving and sanding, but everyone works differently. You might find you work better by using very small amounts of clay and building up to the size and shape you want a little at a time. There's not really a right or wrong way to do it. Everyone will develop their own methods and techniques, so the best thing you can do is practice and experiment and see what works for you. You may also find that your preferences will change as you gain experience. These look roughly symmetrical, but they're a little too small. We'll let this cure overnight, then get back to work tomorrow. Before I add any more clay, I take a minute to sand the surface of the parts I'll be refining. I do this with a nail file and also some needle files. The rougher the surface, the easier it will be to get the fresh clay to adhere and make a solid bond, even where I'm blending the clay in very thin layers. Then I check the size. Like I said, these are too small for the owner's tastes, so we're going to go bigger. We'll want these ears close to 2 centimeters, so this lets me know how much clay I'll need to add. I add more clay with my fingers, pinch them to about the right size and shape, and then I start smoothing and shaping. This will take a while, but it's pretty much the same process as before. After they cure, we'll measure again to make sure the ears are as close to the same size as we can get them. That's the perfect size. Let's look at the other. This one's a little bigger, so I'll mark the edge so I know how far down I need to sand the end. Then it's time to get to work with my least favorite part of any modification, sanding. I'll sand the ears down so they're nice and pointy using a mix of the nail file, needle files, and different grits of sandpaper. In places that are particularly uncooperative or have a lot of excess clay, it's sometimes a good idea to use a knife to carve off large amounts of material. Then you sand as usual to smooth out the marks. Just be careful, because you'll have to work at difficult angles and you don't want to cut yourself if the knife slips. While I work, I make note of the pinholes and pits where I'll need to fill in. That will be the last step of refining. Once the ears are about the same shape and size, and they're as smooth as I can get them with sandpaper, it's time to fill in the bumps. For this, I use Bondo glazing and spot putty. I don't recommend using this indoors, as the fumes are really strong. I'm using it directly in front of an open window, with the room sealed off and a fan on, and I'm wearing a respirator too. I use a popsicle stick to spread a thick layer of putty over the ears, covering all the places I think they should be a little smoother. After it's completely cured, I'll wet sand the putty and take off almost everything I just put on. That may sound wasteful, but it's exactly what it's for, just filling in the chips and dents. The putty is brittle, so you can't do a full modification with it, but it sands off easily, taking us back down to the white epoxy underneath. The putty will only stay in the places it needs to fill, giving a nice, smooth finish. After the putty is sanded, I finish the modification with 600 grit sandpaper, which is fine enough it doesn't leave any visible sanding marks. I've found that anything higher than 600 tends to leave the resin a little shiny. At that point, it's more like polishing than sanding. And here's our end result. They're pretty uniform and look nice and smooth, but there might be a few places I missed. I'll know for sure when I airbrush the ears. It's good to do a test run with color before you try to do a face-up, just to make sure you didn't miss any spots. So here's the doll before and after. Elf ears make a big difference, don't you agree? And that's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss future installments. Thanks for watching. Bye.